When you think about powerful women that have existed in times past, some of the names that might come to your mind is Cleopatra, the Queen of Sheba, or Esther, the Queen of Persia that delivered her people. Or in more modern times, you might think of Queen Elizabeth. But I'm sure that you would not think about the most powerful woman, black woman, who lived roughly 3,000 years ago in a place that we call Kush. She was powerful in many ways. One of the ways is that when she was born, she was a princess. Her father, Kashta, was the king of Kush at that time. She lived in a place called Napata. She was a part of the 25th dynasty of Egypt. Egypt, of course, was referred to by the people who lived in the country as Kemet. Remember that Egypt is a name that was given to that land by the Greeks. But let's get back to this person that you've never heard of, but you want to know about because she was powerful, she was intelligent, and she was effective. In one sense, she was her father, the king, Kashta. She was his secret weapon. But to appreciate the power and the beauty and the sophistication of this woman, you have to get some back history on what led up to her becoming this powerful woman. If you know the history that existed between Kush and Egypt, you know that they had a love-hate relationship. From time to time, they traded with each other, they intermarried with each other, and they fought like brothers. In fact, if we're following the biblical model, Kush and Mizrah were brothers. They were the sons of Ham, which was Ham being the son of Noah. If you follow that, if you accept that as authority, I do, I follow it. So yes, they were brothers, they fought, they traded, and over time they became two mighty nations on the Nile River. In 1500, or to be more exact, in 1550 BCE, Kemet rose up and colonized Kush. That is to say, they came in, set up forts, they set up bases of authority, and they dominated and controlled Kush's economy, its trade, its civil organizations, its local government. Everything about Kush was under the control of Kemet. Not for 100 years, not for 200 years, but for 470 years, Kemet colonized, dominated, and exploited Kush. Kush was patient. It bided its time, so to speak, and waited for its opportunity to regain its autonomy, and that time came. See, what was typical about Egypt, even though it also existed for roughly 3,000 years, is that it went through three periods of time that were referred to as the intermediate periods. And that's a nice way of saying the central government broke down. And the reason for the central government breaking down was that there was this constant tension between the priest and the pharaohs. Unlike the United States of America, the Egyptians did not believe in the separation of state and religion. They believed that religion was an intricate part of the governance of the people. And in fact, God gave guidance through religion to the king, to the pharaoh, in terms of how to run the country. And that made the priest, particularly the high priest, very, very powerful. So let's get back to our most powerful and most significant woman, black woman that you've never heard of. But I have to tell you that Kush was a black empire. The name Kush literally means black, in case you want to look that up. If you want to look it up in its original language, if you want to look it up in the Bible, any way you look up that word, it means black. So how did this one woman become so powerful roughly 3,000 years ago, a little less than that, but just for purposes of our conversation, let's say that she became one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful female on planet Earth 3,000 years ago, and you never heard of her. So what happened was that in the third intermediate period, which is the period of time that Kemet once again had fallen into disorganization. There was this tension and this battling between the priest and the pharaohs, that Kemet then had several smaller regions or fiefdoms and smaller and lesser kings. And in that time when the secular government was falling apart, the religious influence was gaining territory and influence and power and significance. But even in that setting, the priests were becoming increasingly corrupt in Kemet. And the people who were devoted to the god that is called Amun-Ra, or sometimes Amun-Ra, they were frustrated with the fact that there was no reliable government in terms of the pharaohs, and there was no reliable moral guidance that was coming from the priest. Kashta, the first king of the 25th dynasty, figured that out. He figured out that just like the Kemites or the people from Kemet, the Kushites also believed in that same god. That was their main god. And so what Kashta decided to do was to fashion himself as a revivalist or a reformist, as a person who was going to come back and set things straight in a moral sense. Now, inside of the Egyptian religious structure, there was, of course, the high priest, but then there was this office that was created during the New Kingdom. This very influential in terms of spiritual things, in terms of political things, in terms of economic things. This influential office was created. It was called God's wife of Amun. And what God's wife of Amun was essentially the high priestess for the entire nation or empire of Egypt, or Kemet. So it's a very powerful position. The woman who held that position was considered to be God's hand, God's voice, God's direction to the Pharaoh. Very powerful. People paid tithes like we pay, or something similar to tithes, taxes, to this office, to God's wife of Amun. They donated land, they donated gold, they donated silver, they donated precious stones. She was very wealthy, very powerful, very influential. And then let me just give you a little bit more of history. I know I'm taking a long time, but this is very important for you to get this so you can appreciate how powerful this black woman was that I'm going to tell you about. I know I haven't told you her name yet. She, meaning whoever was the God's wife of Amun, in fact was the ruler of the southern part of Egypt. See, Egypt, prior to its unification back around 3100 BCE, was actually two kingdoms, Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. But we've talked about this in past videos. The first pharaoh named Namar, or Narmer rather, or Memphis, which for the city of Memphis, Tennessee is named after, and Memphis in Egypt is named after. He united those kingdoms, but those kingdoms in many ways were still separate in terms of their culture, in terms of the different gods that they worship. So the person who was the high priest in the southern part of the state was essentially a second type pharaoh. He competed on a regular basis, or if it was a high priestess, God's wife of Amun, she competed, or she was at points equal in status and in power and influence with Pharaoh. So now, Egypt had been invaded multiple times, and if you know the history of Egypt, Syria, Persia, later in its existence, Rome and Greece, they all invaded, and they did it with military might. But Kashta, the king, the first king of the 25th dynasty, did not use military might. He used religious influence. He figured out that the Egyptians were very religious people. And so what he did essentially is say to them, God sent me here to rescue you